Next up, we are going to be hearing from Matthew Lansadell. He is coming to us from Canada, as I think you guys remember. He is a spiritual counselor, and he is going to be sharing his insights on the importance of being able to move beyond what society expects of us, and particularly with regards to attachments and how we create attachments with one another. He's going to be talking about the transformative journey of self-discovery that he went on as well, and how he helps to foster a greater connection and navigating life with particularly authenticity and finding what that means for you, as each individual is going to be completely unique. So please welcome back. Welcome back, Chelsea. Welcome. We're going to be sending out replays, so you'll be able to check those out at your own time frame. But without further ado, I'm going to introduce Matt Lansadell. Lansadell, welcome to the summit.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Yeah, it's great. Great to be here.
Absolutely. So I'm excited to get into what your topic of discussion is. But before that, why don't we give everybody an idea of, a little bit more about who you are and how you got to where you're at right now.
Yeah. So like I said, I do intuitive life and spiritual coaching and counseling. My background is actually in addiction counseling. I did addiction work for about 10 years, working in different settings, doing mental health and addiction work. And then I got into doing coaching work. I did fitness nutrition. I needed a bit of a break from doing that work. It was quite heavy. I worked in the jail system for a while and with a lot of mental health. So I took about 4-year break and came back into doing coaching and counseling. I like the hybrid model. I love to use both. The transformative and the therapeutic process are both very fascinating to me. And I love to be able to offer both. And about 3-4 years ago, I started the Gay Men's Brotherhood as just kind of like came back from Asia. I was in quarantine and I was like, I want to just start this vision, this brotherhood, this community, a platonic community where we can come together and find fellowship with our fellow brothers who have similar struggle, and operated that for about a couple months and then brought Michael and Callan in, and we took this vision forward. And now we have a pretty successful podcast. We have this community of over 6,500 guys, gay men, and so yeah, I'm very, very passionate about connection. I want people to feel safe and comfortable to move into meaningful connection and feel fulfilled in their relationships. And I just see in our community a lot of fear and a lot of avoidance of these things. And so I made it my life purpose to create community, but also to teach men how to feel safer in connection and to be able to show up and be authentic. My brand in my business is inspired to be authentic. So there's an interesting story about that. Actually, I was reading this book by Matt Kahn. I can't remember the title of it right now, but, and he asked in the book, he's like, how do you want people to feel when they're around you? And I really took some time to think about that. And I was like, I want people to feel inspired. And it didn't quite feel complete. And I was like, well, what do I want people to feel inspired to be? And the word authentic came. And I was like, okay, this is my new brand. I'm going to carry this forward. And that was about 4 years ago. And I bring that same vision into the Gay Men's Brotherhood, is I want people to feel inspired to be authentic and move into authentic connection. So I think that's what we're talking about today is, any of the things that can possibly get in the way of us having successful relationships with ourselves and with others. And I have a lot of really great insights that I can share with you guys today. So I'm excited about that.
That is an amazing journey. And I know everybody, I'm absolutely certain that there are some people that will be able to relate to that, because I think fear is something that, as you said, it is very prevalent, especially in the climate that we live in today. It's something that pits us against others and other groups of people against themselves. Mm-hmm. When you're working with clients, what do you find are some of the common causes or root indicators of where that fear came from?
Well, if you look at gay men, we have a very We have a very unique experience, right? If you look at minority stress, people in minority groups tend to have minority stress around things like belonging and connection and assimilation and all of these things. And gay men were no different, right? We have had this kind of moral compass shone on us that it's somehow immoral or antisocial to be gay. So we we can buy into that. Most of us do, and we develop
Yes.
we develop internalized homophobia. We are become afraid of being around heterosexual people because we're afraid of rejection. So this core wounding when we're younger. And for some of us, it's not actually just fears; it's reality. Our parents, outcasted us from the family, or we were beat up, we were bullied. These are realities that we had to face as young gay boys. And so, if you look at kind of the impacts that would have on us, it would be probably from my perspective, it would be shame. Toxic shame. We internalize this toxic shame that we're somehow disgusting, defective, broken. There's something wrong with us. That's what shame will do to us, toxic shame. And then the other side would be probably a trauma. So there's the trauma of these things happening to us, potentially physical violence. Fear of physical violence can also be traumatic. But the type of trauma that I want to talk about today would be attachment trauma. And that is essentially a trauma that has been inflicted upon disconnection, right? So there's an element of disconnection, and that would be the wound that we then carry around with us. And attachment trauma directly impacts our ability to have healthy relationships, both platonic and romantic. So that's kind of in a nutshell. We'll obviously go into a bit more about what attachment trauma is, but I wanted to just answer your question directly.
Yeah, the idea of so much wounding that happens when we're young and forms our personality around it. It's almost like this idea of how a pearl forms. It's like there's that shard of sand, and then we build these layers and layers and layers upon until eventually we do come out as beautiful and resilient and stunning as a pearl. But sometimes there are what we perceive as flaws in it. So what is it that you think that people can do when they're looking at that pearl, even though to one person it may be beautiful, to another person, to them, it may be something that is just horrific?
Yeah. Well, this is the journey that I take people on. So people usually come to me in my practice feeling very wounded and not resilient, and they have a lot of things that they want to heal. One of the things that I see a lot is a lot of gay men that have a struggle with intimacy. Intimacy avoidance is a big one. Fear of showing up and being authentic because they're afraid of being rejected. So there is this part where we become the grain of sand in the clamshell, and then we develop, right? Or even using the analogy of the diamond and how much pressure it takes to create this diamond. It comes in on us, right? The society puts a lot of pressure on gay men, and it's through that pressure that we can really transform into something beautiful, and we can become resilient. But there is a path that we need to take. It doesn't just happen. We have to do some healing work, right? And a lot of what we do in the brotherhood space is we talk about healing shame, healing trauma. That's what we talk a lot about on the podcast, is how can we get to that place where we can become the pearl, or we can become the diamond. And so yes, it's almost like we, as gay men, I feel like we take one step backward to take two steps forward, and right. Yes. And it's this analogy. So we come into this life and we're dealt cards that are challenging, but what happens when we overcome challenges and we suffering is what develops character. Suffering is what helps us elevate consciousness. These sorts of things. It's a very much a potent transmuter of consciousness. Suffering is. So when we go through a lot of this, we develop a depth, we develop character, we develop resilience. So I see gay men as, yes, we have it a disadvantage at the beginning, but then it becomes our advantage at the end. It's like, healers, like our wounds become our greatest gifts. our suffering
Absolutely.
becomes our greatest gift. So, but there's work that needs to be done, right? And unfortunately, we can't just transform into the diamond without having to go through the pressure. Yeah.
Well, a diamond is just simply a rock until it actually becomes formed and cut and polished. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I love the analogy. I think that the work that we have to put in, it takes that raw thing that looks like just a rubbed piece of glass, and it creates into this beautiful myriad of rainbow colors.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
What would you say is the first step in that process?
First step would be always self-awareness. And self-awareness is so potent because, I have a saying that I use with my clients, which is 80% of the transformation is being aware of what needs to be transformed. And the 20% is the action we need to take upon once we have the awareness of what needs to be changed.
Right.
So knowing what needs to be changed is one of the greatest things. But what happens is, we develop strong egos and we have defense mechanisms, we have walls, we have all of these things to prevent us from seeing what needs to be changed within us. And I think we often focus so much on the outside world. Well, that needs to be changed. And, we don't want to take responsibility for ourselves. So we point our fingers in every direction other than at ourselves. And,
Right.
sure, yeah, the world needs to be changed. And we were directly impacted by conditioning that we didn't choose, right? So we it's not our fault. But when we start to take responsibility for ourselves is when our lives change. And so being aware of what needs to be changed, I would say, is step one. And then once you know what that is, and usually and this is the lens that I'm trained through and informed by, which is toxic shame and attachment trauma. These are the two things that I think, once healed, gay men liberate themselves and they thrive, because the shame and the trauma, if shame is telling us there's something wrong with us and trauma is saying the world isn't safe, how on earth are we supposed to enter intimacy and connection where we have to show up and be authentic when we feel like there's something wrong with us and that the world, meaning people in the world, aren't safe? It's almost impossible, right? So
Right.
we need to heal these two wounds, and then we're able to start to move into connection and have less addiction and all the things that tend to plague our community. They start to heal, and we start to be able to come together in these ways that I think, through my personal perspective, I think we are the answer for each other. Really, I really believe that. I think it takes healing in our community. And when we have, and right now that's what I'm seeing in our communities, we have a cohort of people that are leading the way. They're doing the healing work and they are saying, come with me. I'm going to show you the way. Right?
Yep.
Because,
Yep.
and I get this a lot in my practice, is a lot of people are like, man, like, this is the first time I've worked with a gay counselor, and all my other counselors have been heterosexual, and they just never fully quite got it, or they were never able to quite fully take me to the place I needed to be taken to. And so I do see this as like, we are the answers for each other. We're here as a brotherhood system to come together and really support each other in our healing journeys. And for some of us, that can be really painful because, if we do have like internalized homophobia present in our psychology, and we are being triggered and activated by other gay men, it's hard to move towards what is triggering us.
Yes, because you want to move away from that.
Exactly. Right. So we need people who are conscious enough to hold space for this and to say, you know what, like, come with me and we'll do this work and feel safe with these people. And then it starts to happen. And I'm seeing this. I don't think I've ever seen as much consciousness in the gay community as I'm seeing right now, it just makes me so happy. Yeah.
I absolutely agree. When you raise your consciousness, when you begin to lean into those things that trigger us, that you first have to become aware of, and then you recognize that, yes, this is a trigger and there is a reason for it.
Mm-hmm.
However, it's also an opportunity to learn about ourselves and take that journey inside of us. It's jumping into a very, very deep, scary ocean for some people.
Yeah, it's big. It's so big. And I've been working on this stuff for a long time. And I thought, if you would have asked me 5 years ago if I had worked through my internalized homophobia, I would have said, oh yeah, I worked through that 5 years ago. Come on, like, that was like, healing 101. But I'm still meeting it. I'm still meeting internalized homophobia inside of me at certain points, and I believe that human beings, we put on pain and hurt and suffering in layers. So it has to be brought off in layers. We can't just wash it all away, right? So, and we will always meet it in a way that is dictated by our nervous system's ability to release and let go and grieve, right? So we can't just, you don't just go to therapy for a year and let go of everything that has happened in your life in 1 year. Like, you might get at a couple layers and you might be feeling like a lot better, but there's always more layers that are going to be there to meet, right? That's just part of life. And I think the ego wants to trick us and tell us, okay, if I work hard for this, this 3 months, I'm going to work with this coach for 3 months and I'm going to be perfectly healed and better. I don't see it working like that. And it's never been like that in my journey. And I don't want to speak for everybody, but the ego wants to trick us that, but I think what ends up happening is when we let go of this idea that we need to be somewhere other than where we are, that's when the suffering starts to subside, right? So we can just really say, okay, I've got things I'm working on. I'm going to work on them. And I'm also going to enjoy life at the same time while I'm working on myself, right? The process doesn't need to be black and white around joy. It can be like, I can work on myself and experience joy at the same time. Yeah.
Yeah. You mentioned that you've seen such an increase in consciousness. And I think that it's so beautiful to see, because there's so many tools that we're starting to become aware of, like, for instance, breath work or mindfulness or meditation, even though these tools have been around for a long time and many people have used them very successfully. They're becoming so much more mainstream that we can understand. It's like, it's not something that somebody out there has to teach us and train us, and we go to a 21-day silent retreat in order to figure out how to do these things. It's like, wow, we can pick up our phone and we can learn so much just by reading the internet, by talking to coaches like you, by getting involved in communities like the Gay Men's Brotherhood. It's so wonderful.
Yeah, I agree. And I think part of it too is that there is more acceptance of to being gay in the world now. And that means that we have more safer spaces. And if you look at the spaces that were safe in the past, it would be, and I shouldn't even say they were 100% safe, but they were kind of safe havens for us to go, which is, gay bars, gay clubs, and bathhouses. Those are the primary places. And what happens in those environments? There's alcohol consumption, drug consumption, these sorts of things. So our community got inundated with addiction problems. And that was the way that we bonded with each other. We did drugs and alcohol as a way to alleviate anxiety and to be around each other. And then, so then the pathology of addiction starts to come on. And so now we're seeing like meetup groups and brotherhood hangouts and all these things. And we have access to pretty much, and I'm speaking obviously where I'm from in North America. I'm not saying it's like this everywhere in the world, but we can get out and we can connect and be with our fellow gay brothers in spaces that are not primarily encouraging the consumption of things that are lowering our consciousness and lowering our vibration and not allowing us to connect with each other in authentic ways. Right. So I think right now there's a lot more opportunity. I think it's great. And that's probably, in my opinion, what's contributing to, the raise of consciousness in our community, is that we have new ways of connecting that are broader. Yeah.
So you mentioned, which I love, this idea that awareness leads to authenticity, because when you're not aware and you're trying to put on these masks, it creates a barrier between finding who that authentic person is inside of yourself and the connection that you can then have with somebody else that eventually will create intimacy.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of us go through our lives, myself, I mean, my goodness, it took me 19 years to come to the awareness that it may be somewhat okay if I'm gay.
Yeah. Yeah. Same here.
I pushed it and pushed it and pushed it away from myself because it was something that terrified me. And although the world is a different place now, it's still, there are other aspects and other members of our community, not necessarily just the gay men within the rainbow community, when they're facing that awareness and they're pushing it off, what do you say to them? Like, how do they become aware that they're even not aware, I guess?
Mm-hmm. Of wearing masks, you mean, like, and not being
Yeah.
authentic?
Right.
So if you look at what most human beings are striving for, it is authentic connection, right? It's only when we are vulnerable that we can be truly held and we can be truly seen and we can be truly heard, right?
Right.
So there's always this desire. And I think that's the underpinning of most authenticity is desire, right? And when we have a desire for connection and we're not able to fully be authentic, the connection will only satiate so much. And usually when we're being that, it's coming from ego. Our ego tells us it's not safe to be this, so be this. So we put our mask forward, and our mask gets the validation. Our mask gets the approval, right? And that can be somewhat satiating, but it's not the full course meal. It's the bag of chips. You know what I mean? Like,
yes.
So we when we learn to take off our masks and we learn how to feel safe doing so, then we get that real yummy connection with people. And I think that teaches us that, okay, this is possible. But this is, I want to also highlight that this is like, masks serve us to a certain degree. Ego serves us to a certain degree.
Oh, yes.
They're very adaptive mechanisms that we use. Like when I go and I'm playing, let's say, hockey on a hockey team, and it's full of guys that are talking about, fag this and gay guys that and whatever, and I have to put on the mask of being heterosexual. This is more so like 20 years ago, right? But not so much anymore. That mask really served me. It kept me safe. Right.
Well, even today, if you're going out on the hockey arena, you have to still put on a mask of aggression and confidence, even though you may not be feeling it in that moment. So, yeah, I can definitely.
Yes. Yeah. And I would say the motivation, usually what is telling us to put masks on, is toxic shame. Something is wrong with me. Something is wrong with my maskless face. Right. Using the analogy of the mask. So what we do is we look around us, we assess our environment. We say, okay, this mask is suitable for this environment. Boom, we put it on, right? But what ends up happening is when we first start putting the mask on, it might be like a cardboard or a paper mask. It feels quite light, and we're getting validation for it. But over the years, the mask becomes made of different materials. It becomes made of like metal, and it gets heavier, and it weighs on us. It's like, man, like this mask is no longer serving me. It's too heavy to carry around. I'm exhausted. I'm not getting my needs met. I'm not having successful dating. That's what I hear a lot from gay men is, my dating life is not good. I'm not able to fully, connect. I'm not able to fully meet people, and I'm not feeling I'm getting my needs met in dating. Well, our needs come when our needs get met. It means we're being authentic. If we're not being authentic, we're not. Our needs won't be met because we're being inauthentic. So, but yeah, there's. I want to read you something actually, because this is an interesting excerpt from the book "The Power of Now" by Eckhart Tolle.
I was going to mention earlier, my journey to awareness began by reading that book.
Yes,
I'm getting goosebumps.
Amazing. This book inspired me to write my first book called Be the Space. And it's a book about presence and learning how to move from your head to your heart. And so I want to read this. Okay. So he goes through in this book, he asks questions. Okay. And then he answers them, which I really love. The question is, in the quest for enlightenment, is being gay a help or a hindrance? Or does it not make any difference? Okay. And he says, as you approach adulthood, uncertainty about your sexuality, followed by the realization that you are different, in quotation marks, from others, may force you to disidentify from socially conditioned patterns of thought and behavior. This will automatically raise your level of consciousness above that of the unconscious majority, whose members unquestioningly take on board all inherited patterns. Yeah. Meaning they don't question anything. Right. We are forced to question because we're different.
Yes.
In that respect, being gay can be a help. Being an outsider to some extent, someone who does not fit in quotation marks, with others or is rejected by them for whatever reason, makes life difficult, but it also places you at an advantage as far as enlightenment is concerned.
Indeed.
It takes you out of unconsciousness almost by force. Okay.
Yep.
So that's the positive. And I want to keep reading because he also highlights where we can fall into the trap, and then we get further away from enlightenment, which is the inauthentic stuff.
Right.
So he says, on the other hand, if you then develop a sense of identity based on your gayness, you have escaped one trap only to fall into another. you will play roles and games dictated by a mental image you have of yourself as gay. You will become unconscious. You will become unreal. Underneath your ego mask, you will become very unhappy. If this happens to you, being gay will have become a hindrance. But you always get another chance, of course. Acute happiness can be a great awakener. I read that, I think the first time I read that book was 10 years ago, and I put a sticky note on that page, and I was like, man, like this is exactly. So I have done a lot of work around disidentifying with the stereotypes of what it means to be gay, and I view authenticity as an energy that is driven by desire. What do I desire to be, and how congruent can I be to my authentic desires? Meaning my authentic desires come from within me.
Right.
How can I share those with the world? How can I express my authentic desires to the world without trying to hold back or be inauthentic or worry about if I show my authentic desires to the world and who I am authentically, that I'll be rejected?
Right.
So I've been reclaiming this, and it's been a long process because it's like sometimes it can feel lonely to disidentify with the heteronormative majority world. And now I'm also disidentifying with the homosexual world because there's a lot of things in this, in that I don't want to be. I want to be Matt. I don't want to be a gay man or a straight man. I want to be Matt, and I want to be whatever Matt wants to move towards as far as his authentic desires.
Well, let me ask you, what's the difference between disidentifying and releasing one identity so that it can encompass multiple identities? Meaning, some of us say that we are just one thing. What's to stop us from saying that we're this and we're that and we're that and we're that?
Nothing. Yeah, that's the beauty. I love that question because I personally think nothing. But what ends up happening is people, they prioritize connection over authenticity. So they'll move towards being what they think that group of people they want to connect with wants them to be, right? So it's like, okay, if I want to connect with the stereotypical gay culture, this is just from my perspective, I have to watch Drag Race. I have to be able to hold conversations on Drag Race and these sorts of things and brand name goods and all this stuff. And this is obviously the stereotype that I'm putting forward. I'm not saying every gay person's like this. I'm using this just as an example, but that's not me. Okay, so and that's what Brene Brown describes as the difference between fitting in and belonging, right? Fitting in is conforming to what we think the group needs us to be, and we abandon who we actually are to become who they want us to be, which is like a fawning or a people-pleasing response. Whereas belonging is we get to just be who we are, and we belong because we are who we are, right? I'm Matt, I'm over here, I'm doing my thing, I'm identifying with all these beautiful self-concepts that I've found work for me, and you can be over there doing what works for you, and we can still hang out, we can still come together, and I don't have to abandon my authenticity to enter connection with you. This takes a lot of maturity though, because if we off the top of this conversation, you talked about fear and divisiveness in the world, and it's like, okay, well, if this person is Republican, this person's Democrat, well, I can't hang out with them, right? Like I will not be around that person, or if this person likes this, then I can't hang out with them. Elevated consciousness means that we can look at other people that have different beliefs, different world views than us, and we can still say, I see your humanity, and I can still be around you, I can still connect with you. And I think we've gotten so caught up in the divisiveness game and fear that we've lost sight of each other's humanity, and we've over-identified with their personality based off of ego structure, right? Yes. So looking for people's divinity is what I try my best to always do, and seeing the humanity in everybody, right?
Right.
Moving towards that as opposed to being like, oh, they don't think the way I do. I don't know. I can't hang out with them. Right. That's.
Well, you mentioned that you're at the very beginning, you said, I introduced you as saying you're a spiritual counselor. So that's what you're moving towards, is what is them that is the most them? or what is me that is the most me. And
Yeah.
it goes beyond the body, because the body ages, it changes. It can, you can literally cut your arm off. Are you the same person or not?
Yeah.
What is it, the you that makes up you? You know, it's, and when you find that you're more identifying with connecting to that, I found in my life, when I look at through the lens of, this is not just a person that is touting this particular political policy or this particular sexual ideology.
Yeah.
When I look beyond that and I see just simply a beautiful soul,
Yeah.
it changes the relationship. It changes the way that I show up with them as well.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, that's beautiful. It takes a lot of maturity, in my opinion. It takes a lot of deep inner work to get to that place where you can do that and be consistent with it, because I still cycle between those two worlds where I still enter ego and I still judge and I still condemn. And I
think we all do in moments.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's okay to be in that, but the key is to be aware of it and be conscious of the unconscious. That's like key. So every time I am in that energy and I am in ego, I'm always aware that I'm in that energy, right? I think that's kind of that next level, right? But I'd like to get to a place where I have more consistency in being, wearing the glasses of divinity and seeing people in their highest expression. Yeah, it's a goal.
Well, I think yes, it's a goal, but I think it's also just simply the process.
Yeah.
You know, we can have a really bad day. I get in the car and somebody cuts me off. I'm in ego. I ain't in the spiritual woo-woo and I'm loving this person. I'm like, how can I kill that person? You know, so it's a moment to moment. It's also very situational, I think.
Yeah.
Because, you know, going back to where we started with this, with the attachment trauma, sometimes when we're trying to heal where that trauma originated and who it originated with, that's the most difficult. It's like, that's the most triggering.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah. I have something that I use to work through that. Like when people cut me off or when anything for that matter, I view it through this lens. Okay. I have an energy bank account and every day I get $100 in $1 bills. Okay. I get $100 of energy and I put that into my bank account. Right. And then when I use energy for certain things, I have to give, money. I've got to give energetic money. So somebody cuts me off and I completely lose my shit and I let it completely ruin my day. I've literally just given that person, say, $50 out of my bank account. Right. And I only got 100. So I view it and I have that moment of pause, in between stimulus and response. I take that moment to pause and be like, okay, do I want to give this person any of my currency, of my energetic currency? Right. And maybe I'll give them a couple dollars and I'll have a moment and whatever. But it's like, do I really want to give this person $50 of my whole day's earning of energy that I get? So I use that as an analogy to always keep me centered in myself. And it's worked tremendously. I think I've been doing this now for about 10 years. And it always helps me pause and think, okay, how do I want to respond here? Yeah.
Well, it's so difficult to, and as you were just saying, it takes an enormous amount of maturity to get to that level, which, by the way, I love that analogy.
Yeah.
It's so apt.
Yeah.
But when you're not at that level of maturity and you're still reacting instead of responding, that's where people are still flailing and they're still stuck in those traumatic reactions instead of choosing to make a conscious response, I think.
Yeah, I agree fully. I agree. Oh, and it's that, if you look at the world isn't safe analogy of what trauma does, it creates that core belief that the world isn't safe. So we employ the 4 trauma responses, right? Fight, flight, flee, or fawn, right?
I've never heard fawn.
Fight, flight, freeze, fawn. Fawn is like becoming agreeable and like people pleasing them. You know what I mean? Like that sort of thing.
I wouldn't know anything about that.
Yeah, I know, right? Spent most of my life doing that one. But yeah, we employ the fight trauma response when we're scared, when we're afraid,
Mm.
right? So we go into
Yep.
fight mode. It's like I'm in my car, someone cut me off, fuck you, and we get all angry and we go into that really aggressive stance because it almost gives us a feeling of like, okay, I can come back into safety because I can protect myself. It's a very primal response.
Yep.
One kind of override that I can share with people that has helped me tremendously is admit that you're scared.
Oh, okay.
Because oftentimes fear puts us into anger, and then anger doesn't allow us to connect with, you know, the underlying feeling of what fear actually brings up for us, which is I'm terrified, I'm scared, right? So we don't need,
Right.
you know, that's part of it. And obviously there's a lot more to trauma healing than just admitting that you're scared. But that is definitely something that I found that has helped me a lot, because I struggled with admitting that I was scared most of my life because it actually wasn't safe to be scared. For me, I wasn't safe to be scared, which kind of sounds like a juxtaposition, but it's like true. And yeah, so it's helped me a lot to just admit when I'm scared.
Well, fear and anger are two sides of an emotional coin. One that causes and creates a level of inaction and withdrawal,
Totally.
whereas the other creates energy and it propels us forward sometimes. So I think it's important to recognize the relationship there. But when you're living in just one side of that coin constantly, which I'm sure some of us have done, that can be completely draining.
Yeah, I agree. Anger can be, like you said, it's like fire. It can be really fun to play with, and it can be almost intoxicating. But what it does is it pushes people away. So it does give us empowerment, temporary empowerment, but the disconnection and separation it creates within our relationships actually creates disempowerment. So it's like a spike. It's kind of like a drug, right? We get the high, it feels really good, but then we have to pay it back the next day, and we go through withdrawal, or we feel really depressed or whatever. Anger does the same thing. It spikes, and then it really impacts us in a negative way.
Right. And a lot of us have a habitual way, like you were saying, that you didn't feel safe to not feel safe.
Yeah.
I didn't feel safe to be angry.
Yeah.
You know, when I became angry, then my mother and my grandmother and that was not allowed. It was terrifying.
Yeah.
So I definitely understand that.
Yeah, well, that would be classic fawning response, right? People pleasing. So we have this emotion that arises that's we've been taught or conditioned to think that it's not acceptable, and we go into fawning, which is usually masking what we're actually feeling and presenting what we think is appropriate to present, and that nothing will get you further away from who you authentically are than fawning, right? Because it's literally you're presenting the opposite of what you're feeling. So yeah.
So I wanted to delve into this other topic that I know you're passionate about, and that is sensitivity. Yeah. Because I think that a lot of the people who are on this may very well identify with highly sensitive people and that concept. Could you talk briefly about that for those of us who may not be familiar with it?
Yeah, definitely. So high sensitivity is a trait. It's a genetic inheritable trait. And the trait is actually called sensory processing sensitivity. So it's across gender. It doesn't impact one gender over the other in the sense of binary. And it is about 100, well, they say about 100, 150 species exhibit this trait.
Wow.
It is genetic, so it's usually passed down. What else is important to note? Yeah.
How much of the population is considered to be highly sensitive?
They say about 15 to 20%.
Wow.
Yeah, Dr. Elaine Aaron is the lead researcher in this area. Oftentimes people will think it's like a trait similar to like introversion or shyness, which it's not, because about 30% of people that score high on sensory processing sensitivity are also extroverts. So I'll share a little bit about the trait because it's important to note. It's actually characterized by an acronym DOES, DOES, just to help people understand and remember it. So the first one is depth of processing. The D stands for depth of processing. And people that are highly sensitive tend to have an ability to process very deep. So we're deep thinkers. We recognize a lot of things, and we're always um, uh, bringing in information and processing it. So we can be in a room and we can observe like probably 2 to 3 times more than what somebody who's not sensitive will observe, and we're bringing in a lot, and that can be a good thing. But it can also lead to the next one, which is which is overstimulation. If you think about, constantly bringing in all of this information, all this data, through like the senses, through the eyes, the ears, feel, our felt sense, it can very much lead to overstimulation. So if you look at the word sensitive and you were to just chum it up to sensitive of what, it would be sensitive nervous system. Our nervous systems tend to be more sensitive than people who are not highly sensitive. And so that's usually one of the main complaints about people when they're highly sensitive, that they struggle the most with the overstimulation, because it can really lead to a lot of challenges. And overstimulation can be caused by, let's say, bright lights, loud noises, itchy fabrics, anything where there's too much happening or it feels uncomfortable. It can really throw a highly sensitive person off and kind of into states of overstimulation.
Right.
The E stands for, there's 2 things. It's emotional reactivity and empathy, high empathy. So pretty much everyone that's highly sensitive would also report being having high empathy. There is a lot more activity in the insular region, the anterior cortex of the brain, where the mirror neuroning fires off, and where empathy is governed. So mirror neuroning, meaning if I were to sit here and you were to become emotional and you were to cry, and I were to see your facial expressions and the muscles on your face, clenching as you're crying, it would create a response in me, and I would feel that. Most human beings have empathy, but highly sensitive people have higher empathy. And then the emotional reactivity is, if you think about where emotions are stored and where they come from our nervous system. So because we have sensitive nervous systems as highly sensitive people, we tend to feel our emotions a lot deeper. And this is a double-edged sword, because we feel pain and hurt and jealousy and things very deep, but we also feel joy and awe and wonder and all these other beautiful emotions really deeply as well. So a lot of the work that I do with highly sensitive people in my Inspired to Be Authentic business is teaching emotion regulation and authentic relating. Those are the 2 primary things that I use in my practice. Emotion regulation is teaching about the nervous system and how to respond and engage with your emotional world to be able to thrive. And authentic relating is really great for shame healing. And it's, the work I do with highly sensitive people and empaths, it translates directly over into working with gay men, because I see attachment trauma and toxic shame in both of these populations, or all 3 of these populations, because highly sensitive people and empaths are different, and they've been marginalized because of being different, and they've been labeled as sensitive and needy and too emotional. So there's a lot of shame that needs to be resolved within both or all of these populations. So and then the last one is the S, which is noticing subtleties in our environment. So I met with you a couple months ago, and I was able to, I'm really good at noticing people, and let's say you came in and you shaved your beard off. I would notice right away that there was this change, right? Because we're processing so much, we're bringing in so much, we're very, very highly observant. So if something changes in our environment, we'll know right away. So again, it's almost this thing about being highly attuned to ourselves and our environment. And that's actually how I define sensitivity. I define it as a gift or an ability of being highly attuned and perceptive of yourself and your environment. That's my own definition. I made it up. You're not going to find it in Webster's dictionary, because if you actually go and look for the word sensitive in there, it's playing off of the stereotype of sensitivity, which is easily offended, easily hurt, which is really unfortunate, because that's not the, that's the stigma of sensitivity, and
Right.
the science of sensitivity is what I'm talking about today. And there's been a lot of research over the last 20 years on this trait, and it's amazing because I now just learned about my sensitivity about 3 years ago, and it's changed my life tremendously, and it changed my career trajectory as well. I started working with this population because it was a game changer for me. Like learning about the trait, I was like, that's the missing piece to my life puzzle, and why I've been the way I've been, and why I've had all these like nervous tics and all this stuff in my nervous system is because I was living with the owner's manual of a non-sensitive person. And I needed to actually discard that owner's manual, bring in the owner's manual of a highly sensitive person. And I started to learn about my nervous system. My whole life changed. I now don't spend, 90% of my time dysregulated, which I did for most of my life. And I was self-medicating with drugs and alcohol and these sorts of things. So yeah, it's been a game changer for me.
I remember a time when I had been living in California for a number of years, and I went to New York City for the first time in, I think it was 13 years. And I remember I came down, I was literally physically ill as a result of the stimulus that was occurring.
Yeah.
And it took like 3 or 4 days in order to start to become acclimated. But I also utilized a tool that my ex actually reminded me of, which is to create this idea of, do you remember in Somewhere Over the Rainbow, or Wizard of Oz, when Glinda comes down in her like beautiful bubble?
I've never seen it. I know, trust me, every time I say that, people are like, oh my God.
Oh my God. Well, from an energetic standpoint, it's a good thing to do, to see it.
Okay,
but
I'll add it to my list.
She comes down in what looks like a soap bubble. Okay. And it's this beautiful rainbow bubble. And my ex reminded me that when I'm being overstimulated, I can like put up what he referred to as a psychic barrier. Yeah. And that's the visualization that I utilize in scenarios like that. Sometimes in crowds, I get that way. Yes. I do not like crowds.
Yeah. Oh, me too. Like my lone wolf syndrome was developed because of being highly sensitive and not knowing and being dysregulated. Is I couldn't be around people. My nervous system was so strung out all the time that people would just throw me off. And I'm now just learning in my life, like I've been doing a lot of nervous system work and a lot of trauma healing, because being HSP and not knowing is traumatic in itself, right? And you're just storing all of this stuff in your nervous system, and you have no way of releasing it. So I've been undoing this work for the last 3 years, like tons of trauma work around this, and it's been huge. So I'm actually now befriending my nervous system in a new way, and it's allowing me to feel safer to move towards people, because my only defense mechanisms were like, yes, I had boundaries, but it was more like, okay, people are overwhelming for me, bright lights, everything is so overwhelming that I needed to just retreat, and get away. And most HSPs actually describe being highly sensitive as like living life in high definition. Everything has more rich texture, more bright, more everything, right? Like my eyes are highly sensitive to light. My ears, like I can't like stand loud sounds too much. So yeah, it's interesting.
Well, like we were talking at the very beginning of this call, I couldn't identify what that sound was.
Yeah. I can pinpoint a highly sensitive people now, like, and it's so magical when I do, because, and I run workshops for highly sensitive people, and I get to witness what it's like when highly sensitive people have been lone wolves and they finally come into connection with their family, like their other highly sensitive people. And it's like, really, I'm not an alien. There's not something wrong with me. Like there's actually 15 to 20% of people on this planet that are like me. So now I'm like really attuned to be able to find or see this in people. So when you said that, I was like, you could hear that? I was like, oh, interesting. So I kind of noted that. I'm like, maybe he's HSP, right? So I'm always picking up on things like that. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, you mentioned that you've started to befriend your nervous system in a new way.
Yeah.
what are some things that people can do? Like I can imagine breathing or maybe even tapping or things like that might be beneficial. But what can people use to kind of calm that cacophony that goes on in their minds and bodies?
Yeah, I would say if you're looking at the number one most probably potent, it's going to be breath. Breath is the remote control to your nervous system, right? And if you're not connected to your breath in a conscious way, you don't have a remote control. So you can't turn down the volume, you can't turn the channel. It's just right. So I use the 4-2-7 breathing, which is 4 seconds in the nose, and then hold for 2 seconds, and then 7 seconds really, really slowly out through your mouth. And that's the main and most important is the 7 seconds, because when we have a highly activated nervous system, our breathing becomes short and rapid, and we actually want to draw it out slow, and that will help regulate the nervous system. So that's been really, really important for me. The breathing. And if there's stored trauma in your nervous system, then work with a professional, like, work with somebody and do some somatic work or talk therapy, EMDR. There's different things that you can learn to start to train your nervous system, because, I had a lot of unprocessed trauma from childhood, and I had a sensitive nervous system, and I couldn't discern what was what. They show up very, very similarly. An activated nervous system within a highly sensitive person, just from overstimulation, can show up very, very similarly to somebody with PTSD that has maybe a flashback or something coming on. It causes irritation. It causes shortness of breath. It causes, a hypervigilance, these sorts of states. So for me, I had to really discern what was trauma, what was my actual organic and natural nervous system. And that's still what I'm discerning now. It's been a long journey for me to get to this point. And I see a somatic therapist weekly that I work with. I did talk therapy with a lady for a couple of years. So, you just got to find what works for you. Something as simple as, okay, let's say the overstimulation's coming in and you have a visual sensitivity. Close your eyes. Right? After I get off this call, I've been staring at a screen for an hour. So I'm going to just take maybe 2 minutes. I'm going to close my eyes and maybe do a little bit of gentle breath. I have earplugs, noise canceling earphones. If I ever go out to a show or something and it's
Crap. Sorry, guys. My browser was not liking that. So hang on 1 second. I'll get you the last 5 minutes of that interview. Where are we? And I wanted to
look at, and then our parents abandoned us. It directly impacts. So you could also call attachment trauma, constant neglect or not feeling seen or heard by your caregivers could have a massive impact on us. And, as gay men, when things happen, so all is good.
Yep. I agree. I think it's, it always, it comes back to the authenticity when you are having to react. It's like, wow, instead of respond as a mental choice, you're reacting. You're like, wow, that's real.
Yeah, exactly. I love that. Did you want me to talk a bit about attachment trauma? I did say off the top, I promised the listeners that I would share a bit about that. Or do you want to?
Yes, please.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So I just think it's important because it is one of the bigger things that impacts us as gay men. And I think it's really, really, and not even just gay men, the whole world is impacted by attachment trauma. But if you look at what attachment is, it's our ability to connect. Okay. And if you look at what trauma is, it's a wound. Right. And it's a wound that we make meaning of. So something happens in this experience and we make a meaning. It means something about us or about the world. And so attachment trauma is a wound around our ability to be able to connect. So disconnection, some form of disconnection or some form of unmet need happened and it occurred. So examples of this could be like abandonment, neglect, not feeling seen or heard growing up, not feeling understood, belonging, being bullied. So you could also call attachment trauma, well, attachment trauma is oftentimes characterized within the relationship with our caregivers. That's where attachment trauma tends to be primary. But I also use interchangeably the term interpersonal trauma. It's trauma of relationships, right? And how disconnection plays itself out in relationships. This can be highly traumatic for a lot of people. So I just wanted to note that, because for a lot of people, we often are conditioned to believe that trauma is this massive event that happens, like being in war, or 9/11, or rape, or these sorts of things. And these are very, very traumatic, and they can lead to post-traumatic stress disorder for sure. But attachment trauma and interpersonal trauma are just as important, in my opinion, and they are significantly impacting people in a big way. And oftentimes people don't realize that constant neglect or not feeling seen or heard by your caregivers could have a massive impact on us. And as gay men, if we felt like there was something wrong with us and we had a lot of toxic shame, and then our parents abandoned us, that can lead that shame can also bleed into becoming attachment trauma. And then we have these two kind of things that we're navigating. And people that have attachment or interpersonal trauma and it's ongoing, this can lead to CPTSD, which is complex post-traumatic stress disorder, which is there isn't an actual event that occurs per se. It's a series of events. It's developmental trauma, essentially, is what it is, CPTSD. And this is a really complex thing to work with, right? And I do see this, and I'm not a psychiatrist or a psychologist, so I don't diagnose people, but I do see this in the gay community tremendously. A lot of CPTSD, a lot of PTSD, and this is, again, one of the things that we need to be healing. But again, if you look at how to work on something like PTSD, is you got to go back and work with the trauma that created it, right? Post-traumatic stress disorder. We got to work with the attachment trauma, and we got to work with the toxic shame in order to be able to move through and heal. So I wanted to bring voice to that. And then, some of the things that we were going to also touch on is the attachment styles, right? So if you look at attachment trauma, it directly impacts our attachment style. Attachment styles are characterized by the things that we experienced when we were younger. So if we didn't have much trauma or anything and there was no attachment trauma in our childhood, we're likely going to develop a secure attachment. And if we have attachment trauma, we are likely going to develop insecure attachment, right? And so a lot of the work that we need to do is we need to do the attachment trauma healing work, and then we can develop a secure attachment. And I want to leave that as a message of hope today for people, is just because we have attachment trauma and we develop an insecure attachment does not mean we can't change that, right? We can heal attachment wounds and injuries, and we can turn them into security. And this is the work I've been doing for the last 10 years. I have a disorganized attachment style from my childhood, and I've been working tremendously hard for the last 10 years in therapy and doing different healing modalities to develop a secure attachment. And so I understand the process of moving from insecurity to security. And I do think that, and I will say too, the statistics show about 50% of the world's population has insecure attachment. And I would say that's probably higher in the gay community. So let's say it's 60 in the gay community. Okay. And that means that, 50%, 60% of the people we meet are going to be struggling to move into attachment, right? This is likely why there's a lot of struggle with gay men in dating and finding relationships. So again, it's so important to understand the attachment style that we have, so we can start to learn how we're navigating the world and how we're navigating relationships and the fears we have around relating with people. That will give us all the data we need in order to do the healing we need to do, so we can start to move towards connection in a safe way. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love that. It's so important to understand. I mean, it's like you said at the very beginning, it starts with awareness.
Yes.
But I think that the beauty of what you do and coaches and therapists is you bring light to the stuff that we don't know that we don't know.
Yes.
You know,
Yeah.
there's this portion of the world that we're aware of and we know,
Yeah.
and then there's this larger portion of the world that we're aware that we don't know.
Yeah.
But then there is a universe that we're completely unaware of.
Yes.
And I think through doing what you do and working with gay men, as well as, you know, the Gay Men's Brotherhood and everything, I think that you're really helping to push that idea of what we don't know into at least there's some awareness of it, so they can begin to address it.
Yeah, I think that's huge. And, you know, I want to say too that it's like, it can be challenging being that, because I love how you use that analogy, shining the light, because I do look at myself as like that. I go around and I use my flashlight and I shine light in the darkness, where people need to see the truth of things. And I don't just do that. I do that to myself too. I'm always shining the flashlight in on my own shadows and saying, okay, what needs to be worked on here? So I can activate people. My work activates people, especially my public work and the videos I create and stuff, because when someone's shining light on the dark parts of you, it can feel very, very activating and very uncomfortable. But
yes,
it is the treasure in the trigger. That's when something activates and a light gets shone on us and we see something that we didn't want to see. That is what we need to move towards to liberate ourselves. So we're offering people that are light workers are offering the path to liberation to people, right? So if we can put our ego aside for a moment and say, why am I activated? What is this bringing up in me? And start to question it, you'll find the path to peace, right? So, and not saying that what I'm shining is the exact thing that you need, but it might point you in the direction of what you're needing to move towards. Yeah.
Every bit of information helps you to move forward, whether it's something that you think is useful in that moment or not.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I know we're coming up on time here during this session, so I just wanted to say another immense moment of gratitude and thankful that you are here and you're presenting on these topics, because I think so many people are in need of the awareness that you're bringing to the community. So thank you for joining us.
Yeah, I appreciate it. And I love always connecting with you, and I love your wisdom as well. You bring a lot to the table too. So thank you.